11 Iranian footballers stood on the most watched stage on earth and refused to sing their country's national anthem. Back home in Iran, state televisions cut away before the anthem began. That moment was not shown. However, millions of Iranians watched it anyways. To understand why that silence was deafening, why it traveled across the world like a shockwave, you have to understand what football has meant to Iran for the past 100 years. You have to understand a woman called the Blue Girl, a match described as the most politically charged in World Cup history, and a team that is about to play all of its 2026 World Cup games on American soil, while the two countries are in an active war against each other. This is not a football story, because it was never allowed to be. Welcome back to the World Cup Chronicles. Football arrived in Iran the same way it arrived for most parts of the world, through British workers. The employees of Anglo-Persian oil companies played football in the south of the country. The local Iranian employees watched, and soon they formed their own teams. They were pelted with stones and accused of playing the game of infidels. But the game spread anyways, north from the oil fields up into the cities and into the schools, but also into the consciousness of a nation that was in the middle of a painful modernization. When Iran beat a team of British workers, literally beating them at their own game, it became headline news. A small but a real win for a country that has spent decades feeling like the plaything of foreign powers. And from the beginning, football was not just a sport in Iran. It was a measure of something, a type of statement, a way of saying we exist and compete and we belong. Then came 1979 and everything changed. The Islamic Revolution was one of the most defining political events in the 20th century. And in its early days, football was not on anyone's agenda. Sport was seen by the new revolutionary leadership as a Western indulgence, a type of distraction from the serious work needed to build an Islamic republic. Women who had freely attended games before the revolution without any types of restrictions found the gates closed to them. But not through any written laws. No legislation was passed. No decree was formally issued. The guards at the entrance simply told them they were not welcomed. Over 40 million Iranian women were banned from watching the country's most popular sport in person. And the authorities justified it through various different ways over the decades. The language was too coarse, or the sight of men's legs was inappropriate, the atmosphere was too aggressive, and the justifications kept on changing. But the ban did not. But Iranian women found a way to resist. In 2005, a group called the White Scarves gathered outside Al-Saadi Stadium ahead of Iran's World Cup qualifiers against Bahrain. They were not permitted to carry any types of banners, so they wrote their message on their white scarves and wrapped it around their heads. The authorities, they could confiscate a sign, but they could not confiscate a hijab. One of the messages read, "Half of Al-Saadi Stadium is mine." And then came Sahar Kodayari. Sahar Kodayari was 29 years old and a devoted fan of Esteghlal FC, nicknamed the Blues. She loved football the way millions of Iranis love it, completely unconditionally. In March 2019, she went to Al-Saadi Stadium to watch her team play, but at the gates, she was arrested. She spent 3 days in detention, and when she was released, they told her she would face trial. And she overheard officials saying that she should get 6 months in prison for attempting to enter the stadium. She sets herself on fire outside the courthouse, and 9 days later, she dies. And the world gave her a name, the Blue Girl. And her death caused a global outcry that reached FIFA. And for years, FIFA had issued Iran gentle warnings on stadium bans, allowing the Iranian Football Federation to offer token gestures. A handful of women admitted to one match, then barred from the next. But after Sahar Kodayari died, FIFA set a deadline. Iranian women must be allowed into the stadiums, or Iran would face expulsion from international competitions. In October 2019, more than a month after the Blue Girl died, around 4,500 women were allowed to enter Al-Saadi Stadium for World Cup qualifying games for the first time in 40 years. They were seated in a designated section separated from the men. But the ban has not been consistently lifted since. Women have been pepper sprayed trying to enter stadiums as recently as 2022. The fight is not over. But the blue girl's name is written into history, and she did not die for nothing. Iran were going to the World Cup for the first time in almost 20 years. And in Iran, the streets erupted. Men and women poured out into the streets, mixing in public spaces in ways the regime had tried to suppress for nearly 2 decades. Members of the Revolutionary Guard, the religious paramilitary force tasked with enforcing the regime's social codes, reportedly joined in the celebrations themselves. One journalist wrote the regime had been defied by a football match, not by a protest or by a political movement, but by a kick in Melbourne, Australia. And the draw for the '98 World Cup took place, and Iran found themselves in a group with the United States. The two nations had not had any diplomatic relationship since the Islamic Revolution in '79. USA had an embargo on Iran, and Iran called America the Great Satan. But the complications began before a ball was even kicked. Under FIFA regulation, the away team, which was Iran at this point, had to walk towards the other team and shake their hands. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei issued express orders. The Iranian players must not walk towards the Americans under any circumstances. FIFA spent hours negotiating a solution, and eventually the Americans agreed to walk towards Iranian players instead. But then at the game, the Iranian players did something nobody expected. They produced a white rose, a symbol of peace, and handed one to each and every American player. Both teams posed together for a photo, something that had never happened in a World Cup before. And Iran eventually won that game 2-1. US defender Jeff Agos said after the game, "We did more in 90 minutes than politicians did in 20 years." And in Iran, the streets filled again. The Revolutionary Guards were football fans first. "24 years later in Qatar, 11 Iranian players stood in a line and said nothing. The protest was for the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who died in the custody of the police in September 2022. She was in custody for allegedly wearing her hijabi wrong. The demonstrations that followed were described by experts as the biggest ones since the Islamic Revolution. The regime responded with arrests, violence, and executions. And before the tournament, Iranian national team captain Ehsan Haisafi publicly said, "We have to accept the conditions in our country are not always right, and our people are not happy." For an Iranian public figure, that statement in that moment carried a lot of personal risk. And then, in front of a global audience of hundreds of millions, the entire team stood silent as the national anthem played. Even though the moment was not broadcasted on Iranian state television, Iranians watched it anyways, through VPNs, social media, or foreign broadcasters. The Iranian players had been told that solidarity with the demonstrations could mean consequences when they returned home. They knew what the regime had done to athletes who spoke out against them, including champion wrestler Naveed Afkari, who had been executed in 2020 after being accused of killing a guard during an anti-government demonstration. But they stood silent anyways. 1 minute of silence broadcasted to hundreds of millions of people. No speech, no place card, or no political statement. Just 11 men refusing to open their mouth. It was, in its own way, one of the bravest things any national team has ever done at the World Cup. And now in 2026, this World Cup is played on American soil, while the two are at war with each other. And Trump's travel ban means that Iranian fans are not allowed to enter the nation, but not only the fans. The team themselves are not allowed to stay in the country. They have been forced to live outside of the US, flying in only for their games, meaning that they fly in, play their game, and then return home every single game. Greatest thing about football is that it's a sport without borders. No barriers of language, everyone can play. But with sport, there also needs to be a level playing field. And America's treatment of the Iranian national team is nothing short of disgraceful. It defeats the purpose and the spirit of the game, forcing them to play their games in America but not allowing them to stay in the country is a disgraceful decision, and is something that is evident in Iran's games. While all other teams are staying in the city which they're playing for, recharging and preparing while they're living there, Iran has to travel before kickoff even begins. They are tired or worked and put through misery before they even kick a ball. So the Iran football national teams are heroes because they have only been treated with hostility, but they keep on fighting. For over 40 years, half the country was not permitted outside football stadiums. A woman died trying to get through its gates. 11 players stood silent in front of the world in protest of what was happening outside them. And this summer, the national team that plays inside the stadium will travel to a country that calls them their enemies. And they have to go there alone because their fans will not be allowed to go. And football for most countries is a sport. But for Iran, it has always been more complicated than just that. It's been more painful and more honest than that. It has been a place where the things the country cannot say out loud is being said anyway. In goals, in roses handed out before the games, and in silence before the anthem. In women writing their demands on their scarves, because it was the one thing nobody could take away from them. The national team has never just been a football team. They have been a mirror held up to a country and a world that keeps looking away.